If you enjoyed the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. So Tug, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I think my earliest memory is watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon, so I figured I was going to be an astronaut, as all kids did at that time. But my father was an armourer in the Air Force, and after he left, he couldn't let it go, and he kept taking us to air shows. And growing up in North Yorkshire, there was Finningley, Church Fenton. Church Fenton was a massive air show in those days. And I just remember going year after year after year, and it just kind of got under your skin. The jets looked spectacular. The 2 stars of the show were always the Vulcan and the Lightning. And I just thought that would be such a cool thing to do. Never once thinking I'd be able to get there, but that's where it all started from, I think.
So when did you join the RAF, and can you talk us through some of the aircraft you started your initial training on?
Yeah, I joined the aircraft on the 30th of September 1985. It's etched into my brain. I bombed my A levels at school, so I was what we call a direct entrance. I didn't go through university, hence I didn't fly a single minute before coming into the Air Force. So first off, I did elementary flying training on the venerable Chipmunk, which was real old Spitfire Battle of Britain type aeroplane, for a trainer. Did about 65 hours on that, I think, and then a long 1-year course on the Jet Provost Mark III. Everybody joined as a fast jet pilot in those days, and if you passed the JP3 course, you went on to the faster JP5 to do what was called Group 1 Phase 1. So I did a fair bit of time on that, and then got the dream to go to Valley and fly the Hawk T1. And that's where I got my wings in June of '88. I got my wings, and then having had a brilliant time getting those wings, I then went on to fly the Hawk T1A at Chivenor at TAC Weapons, and that was an absolute bloodbath. It was almost like a survival course. And got by that time I wanted to fly the Phantom, and got my dream posting, and the rest is history from then on,
Yeah, so why did you want to go and fly the Phantom and not the Jag or the Harrier, for instance?
First off, I was pretty rubbish at ground attack. I wasn't going to worry that world. I got my teeth into air combat and intercepts at TAC Weapons. Leading up to TAC Weapons, I didn't care what I flew. I just wanted to fly something fast at the front line. But it wasn't until you sampled kind of what the front line did at TAC Weapons training that you found you either had a knack for one side or the other. And air defence and air combat were my things. I'm not saying I was any good at them. I just really loved them. And out of the instructors at TAC Weapons, it seemed that the Phantom guys seemed to be the guys who were having the most amount of fun. When I went into TAC Weapons, they were still taking Lightning pilots, and that was my absolute dream. It really was. But they've been that about a month after I started TAC Weapons, I think. So next best thing was the Phantom, and there we are.
So what were your first thoughts on the F4?
Oh, it frightened the living daylights out of me. I mean, it was huge compared to anything I'd ever flown before. The Hawk, you kind of strap onto yourself. This thing, you had to climb up steps to get into it. It was just unbelievably big and noisy and ugly, and it looked like it meant business. So that my first impressions were, I've got no hope of taming this, but it was just it just looked like it was a war machine, so why wouldn't you want to have a go in that, But those are my first impressions, yeah, frightened to death.
So can you talk us through some of your initial training, and did you take to the jet naturally?
I think, answer the first thing first, I don't think I ever took to any aeroplane naturally. I'm a bit of a I suppose you'd call me a slow burn. It takes a lot of hard work for me to get involved with an aeroplane, and then I start to get to grips with it after that. So to start with, we do a lot of simulators first off, just learning basically checks, start up, shut down, flying the thing around without crashing it, lots of instrument flying. And then we went into things like basic intercept style training on ground trainers. Take the aeroplane airborne, you find that everything you learnt in the sim has fallen out your brain without you knowing, and it was all a bit of a shocker at the start. But general handling to start with. Circuits are a big deal in something like a Phantom, which was reasonably difficult to fly, I think, especially at low speed. So lots of circuit flying. Then you move on to formation, close formation, tactical formations, and then we get into the meat of the navigator students then using the radar and us doing the job that we're probably going to do for the rest of our lives, which is intercepts and air combat. So that's the general progression. You start off with, I would say, relatively easy stuff, but it's not. And then the more confident you get, then they introduce the harder stuff. Yeah.
So how did the F4 handle?
I guess everybody would say at low speed like a pig. So you had to really concentrate all the time that you're in the circuit. Angle of attack is how you fly these aeroplanes. We don't fly them on speeds really. We fly them on angle of attack, which is the angle of the leading edge to the airflow sort of thing. So all fast jets fly on angle of attack. And if you exceeded the angle of attack at low speed, the thing would depart and you'd be banging out at best. So a lot of worries, I would say, to start with when you're down there. As soon as I think with all fast jets, as soon as it gets some speed under its belt, it was brilliant. You know, it took my breath away. It really did. And the more confident I got with it, I think the more confident it got with me. It kind of worked out. I wasn't trying to rip it apart, and so it stopped trying to kill me. You know, that was the progression that we had. I wouldn't say I'm like I said, I'm not a natural pilot at all. I have to work really hard to get the success, and so I did have to work quite hard to keep the thing in the right direction and do what I wanted it to do.
And is it true that it took about 4 to 5 seconds from pushing the throttle forward to get it into reheat?
No, I mean, there's. I've never put a stopwatch on it. That's the thing. In the Phantom, you go to the limit of dry power, and then you have to rock the throttles outboard and push them into burner. Then, as soon as you rock the throttles outboard, the burner's light, and then you shove it all the way up to full burner. And it was kind of carefree handling at most levels, and you'd feel the kick up your backside. I always thought almost straight away, but it's probably because I was so maxed out about what was going on. I wasn't on top of my game. Yeah. Up at higher levels though, you needed to be a little bit more careful with the engines, because if you try and slam them, the pressure builds up and they just surge and make a bit of a bang. So a little bit more gentle lighting the burner up at higher levels. So maybe that's where people tell you this whole thing takes about 4 seconds for the thing to light. It always seemed to be blooming instant for me.
Yeah. So let's talk about what was it like being on a first frontline squadron.
That was I couldn't wait to get to the front line all the way through training, because all I'd heard was it was the best time of your life, and it absolutely was. It ticked every single box I was looking for. Training was hard. People said the front line was hard, but by the time I got to the front line, I think I had something like 350 hours under my belt. Wow. And so the learning curve was steep, but I should have been able to deal with it, and I could. But it was everything. The aeroplane was brilliant. My squadron mates were, just off the charts good. They're friends for life. And they say your first tour should be the best time of your life, and it absolutely was. Is that true for most pilots, would you say, or aircrew? I think we all look back with a bit of nostalgia and romance about first tours. I know some people who have hated their first tour, All I could say is that of all of us my first tour was on 92 Squadron out in RAF Germany. Got brilliant history, and I always used to look into the history of my squadrons to see what I had to live up to, you know, all these people that had gone before and made names for themselves. So I always did that, and I don't know anybody who had 92 Squadron as their first tour and hated it. You know, it's just a special number and got some special history, you know.
Yeah, I've heard that many occasions.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, but everybody else that tells you about other squadrons, they're all wrong. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, did you ever conduct DACT in the Phantom, and how did it fare?
Yeah, so we DACT was a big deal on fighter squadrons. Every fighter squadron you go to will do quite a lot of dissimilar air combat. Now the thing about the Phantom was, when I got onto it, it was one of the oldest fighters on the block. There were still some F-104s around that the Germans were still flying in. That was a rocket ship, you know.
Oh yeah.
But the Phantom was probably the second oldest fighter out there. So we shouldn't have had any success whatsoever against F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, all of those kind of things that were out there. But actually, from a DACT point of view, I think we probably won 80% of the fights that we were in, and that's not an idle boast. But it's nothing to do with the manoeuvring of the aeroplane. There were some pilots on my Phantom squadrons that could turn the Phantom inside out. I was not one of those guys. I knew what I was good at, I knew what I wasn't particularly good at, and I knew what my aeroplane was good at and wasn't particularly good at. But when it came to tactics and just low down aggression, and it was almost like we were off the hook. You know, everybody expected to beat the Phantom, and they got a massive shock when they didn't, because of our mindset. Mostly, if people flew their fancy jets as well as they could, we didn't stand a chance. But that didn't stop us thinking we could win every fight that we went into. And like I said, I think we had a lot more success than we really should have done.
Did you ever get to fire live weapons on the Phantom?
I did. I fired one. It was a Sparrow missile. So by that time we had the Sky Flash, very similar missiles, but there were still some old Sparrows in the inventory. And so once in a while they dust these things off, you know, and clean all the bird crap off them from the hangars, and go, oh, God, this thing's going out of date. We probably need to launch it. And so we go to Valley and do it all in Cardigan Bay. They'd launch a remote aircraft out of St Athan that carried a radar towed device. We'd lock that up and fire it. So I remember firing my first missile. It was an AIM-7 Sparrow, really old one, and we were doing a ridiculous visual shot, and I had to keep the target right in the middle of the gun sight all the way through so that it would track. It didn't have much hope of working. Anyway, I tracked this thing like a god for about 10, 11 seconds, and the G increased all the way through it as we were passing. And apparently I heard the bang and the whoosh as this thing went off the aeroplane. It was really spectacular. And then tracked and tracked and tracked, but didn't see it go past the target. And then having tracked all this time, the photo chase then said, oh yeah, it tracked for about half a second and then buggered off into the sea, you know. So that was my first introduction to firing weapons live. I'd fired guns before on the Hawk, dropped practice bombs, but this was the first proper fighter pilot weapon thing.
You probably have many a story, but maybe can you share one that sticks out in your mind for our viewers?
Yeah, I think this is it. When a pilot gives up flying, all he does is talk about flying. So I can bore you for hours with stories. I think probably the thing that sticks in my mind most, crashing on landing, is probably the thing that jumps out the most. So I just got to Germany. I had about 100 hours on the jet, and we were night flying, doing a workup trip for me. Came into land, and there was this big crack, and the nose wheel broke forwards. Now, if it was going to break, it would normally come back into the wheel well, but it broke forwards. So I was sitting there at an odd angle like that, about 160 knots. The radome was cutting a groove in the runway, and we were covered in sparks. All of these captions went off. So the caption panel was lit up like a Christmas tree. My navigator called Mayday, we've crashed. And I had to bring the thing to a halt, but we had no brakes. And our friction was going to stop us anyway. But if we didn't stop by the overrun cable, this big steel cable at the end of the runway would come up the radar and through my canopy and probably cut me in half, sort of thing. So I was under a bit of pressure to bring the aircraft to a halt. And there was this reversionary braking mode on the Phantom called elephant foot braking. Absolutely true. And if you put, I don't know, it's like £1 million of pressure through the toe brakes, it mechanically pushes the brake disc together. It's not £1 million, but you know, who knows what it is. But I tell you what, I probably put £1 million of pressure through those toe brakes, because it was the scariest thing I'd ever done up to that point. Brought the thing to a halt. There was a bit of a fire behind. The fire crews put it out, and that was it. I just thought I was some massive hero, until the next day when the boss didn't speak to me. He spoke to my navigator to find out how hard my landing was, to see if it was my fault, you know. And luckily, by the end of the day, they did an investigation. It was the whole fleet was grounded because of huge metal fatigue in the nose gear struts. So you know, Tug was in the clear for for another week or so, until I screwed up the next time, no doubt. Yeah.
So no bollocking that time.
Well, actually, it was even worse. He blanked me. The boss just didn't look at that. That's even worse. You know, I could have taken a bollocking, but not the silence. So yeah, so that kind of focuses your mind, I think, right at the start of your first tour.
Absolutely.
You know.
So how would you sum up the Phantom?
Oh, I adored it. I absolutely adored it. I think it turned me into the man that I am today. I think not just the aeroplane, but the camaraderie of the people on that fleet. We were every aircrew you'll talk to a Buccaneer guy, he'll say it was the best fleet out there, and we were special people. And the Lightning guys will say the same thing. The Harrier guys will tell you that. But we truly believe that, and I think I miss it to this day. I'd love to fly it again. I really would, but it had its time, and that was that. But you know, looking back with a rose-tinted spectacles, there's nothing about it I could fault. You know.
So Tug, you also had an exchange on the F-18 with the Marines. Tell us how this exchange came about.
Yeah, I mean, luckiest man in the RAF and most hated man in the RAF as well. So there were maybe 30 fast jet exchanges around the world, lots with European air forces, Australia, and a lot in the United States. And so every year on my annual report, you had to put down what you want to do on your next tour. I always put American exchange. Didn't care what I flew, just something different and something kind of sexy. Mm-hmm. And out of nowhere, I got a call from the station commander. I was a flying instructor at the time at Valley, and a lot of exchanges were going from that TAC weapons area. So I complained about TAC weapons. I then became a TAC weapons instructor, but I did it because I thought, if I'm going to get an exchange tour, this is my best chance. I'm not shining enough, I think, compared to everybody else at the front line. I was new on the Phantom. There were some superstars there getting exchanges. So I thought, I'll take a bit of pain and go and live at Valley for 3 years, hone my skills and maybe get some qualifications, and that'll be that. And it worked out. And the station commander rang me, said, how do you fancy F-18s with the Marine Corps at El Toro in California? Which
but there was no, I'm going to think about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely none of I can't tell you what I exactly said over the phone, and that was it. Just fell into my I say that I tried to shape myself a little bit while I was an instructor and do the best job that I could and get some quals, and I was just the right name in the frame at the time. Mm-hmm. Was there a lot of competition though between the pilots at the time to go for these exchanges? Yeah, we all, you say competition, I mean we weren't, there wasn't like a selection board that we all went and interviewed for. You just put it on your annual report every year. Right. And everybody that I knew wanted to do an exchange, because we got to fly, if you went to the right places, you got to fly the best fighters or bombers out there at the time. So a friend of mine ended up doing the Norwegian exchange, and you think, God, you know, living in Norway, how cold it is. He was flying an F-16. You know, it's a great time, great aeroplane. There were 2 exchanges I thought were the plum exchanges. One was F-18s in Australia, because that was like living in an exotic place. And the other one was F-18s in California, and lucky me. Yeah.
Was there a selection though? Because was there no F-14 Tomcat like exchanges or anything like that? Was it just like you getting Hornets and that's it?
Yeah, there was basically, if you were coming up for posting, whichever one was coming up. I guess they looked at annual reports. They looked at how we were doing professionally. We had an annual report to tell the Air Force how we were as officers in the Air Force, but we also had something called the Form 5000, which was how you were doing from a flying point of view. So we had 2 annual reports really as aircrew, and so they'll have looked at where people were suited for it. Now I was a fighter pilot, not a bomber pilot, so I wasn't going to get an exchange onto an F-16 ground attack unit. But the F-18 was absolutely multi-role. The job was supposed to be OCU instructor, and my predecessor had done that for a little bit and went, well, this is a waste of time. Managed to wheedle himself onto the front line and ended up on 314 Squadron, which was one of the premier single-seat units. So I go over there knowing that I'm going to the front line. I just don't know which squadron. And it was an even better dream come true. You know, rather than be a OCU instructor and sit in the back for quite a few of your trips, I was going to be on the front line. So even better than the best deal ever.
Absolutely. And was it unusual for a 2-seat pilot to go for essentially a single-seat pilot role like the Hornet?
No, not necessarily. By that time, if I could have gone at the end of the Phantom, because I've got a frontline tour underneath me. Even though I didn't probably get a single seat recommend out of TAC weapons, so which is why I went to a 2-seat aeroplane. By the time I finished a frontline tour, I should be able to fly a single seat jet anyway, and plus the fact I just spent 3 years teaching air combat and low-level ground attack, mostly flying on my own in a Hawk. So I think I was kind of suited for it. The irony was, I arrived, did the OCU. The first half of my tour on the Hornet, I was in twin-seat Hornets, F-18D, and then the second half, it was like the Wild West. I went and I was on single-seat Hornets, but on a reserve unit.
Right.
So these are all airline pilots who flew airliners during the week and led a 4-ship of Hornets at the weekend.
Was it like the National Guard kind of thing?
Yeah, a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Air National Guard, reserves, all very similar. It was fantastic. Yeah. It really was. Yeah.
And where were you going to be located?
So I was expecting to stay at El Toro, which is in Orange County, maybe about 45 minutes south of LA, which is a nice place, but inland. And I arrived there, and it was all very exotic and very nice. And then very quickly, I found out that El Toro was going to be closing, and they were going to move us to Miramar. And oh, come on! You know, this is like it's like I won the lottery. Then you're loading up the raffle, and now the football pools. And so I knew I was going to be moving to Miramar after the OCU. We lived in Ocean Beach in San Diego, and I flew Hornets out of the Top Gun hangar at Miramar.
Did you ever think someone's winding me up here? This can't
I did think. I do wonder whether I slept through all of that, or I was in a coma or something, and it didn't actually happen. So yeah.
So yeah, how long was the process from I guess like when you first heard to putting your boots down in America?
I think we're probably looking at 7-8 months or so. So it was announced that I was getting the tour, and that there's all sorts of stuff you've got to go through before going on exchange. So I needed to do a officers command course, which was 3 weeks away from flying. PV interviews, all sorts of things to actually gear me up, and a lot of stuff happening in the background to gear us up as a family to go across the States. So it was probably 8 months all told. And then when I first arrived, my predecessor, we had a really good 6-month handover. So normally you'd turn up, your predecessor would have a couple of weeks and then they'd scoot. But he'd said that it's so difficult to get going with the Marines, it's best to do like a 6-month handover. So, and he was brilliant. He was brilliant with us. You know, got me squared away and good to go.
Brilliant stuff. So did you and the family stay on base, or were you based out most of the time?
No, we didn't get the option of staying on base. I don't even know what the quarter situations were like at El Toro and Miramar. So in the first, we had 2 weeks when we arrived. In that time, we had to find a house to rent, 2 cars, driving licenses, insurances, everything. Basically starting your life from scratch. You had 2 weeks to do it, so it was fairly intense. But we found a lovely place to live in Orange County with some nice landlords, and then we did exactly the same thing again when we moved down to San Diego. But we were able to do that in a bit more slow time, find a place
You're an expert
down
then.
there. Oh yeah, look at that, yeah. I was practically American by then. Yeah.
So how were you welcomed when you got to America?
So I've always said this about the Marines. I love the Marine Corps, absolutely. I love their ethos of it's core God country, all of that stuff you see on films, and everybody thinks it's Hollywood. It's not. They truly believe that. Their band of brothers and sisters is off the charts, and I love them for that. And I got the impression the OCU wasn't brilliant the way it was handled. It was way too long for me, and because I was just a student on the OCU, I wasn't. The staff knew I wasn't going to be staying there and becoming an instructor with them.
Yeah.
As soon as I arrived on my first frontline unit, it was VMFA 121 at Miramar. I reckon within 10 minutes, I felt as though those Marines would walk over broken glass for me, because I was wearing their badges. It didn't matter that I was British. All of a sudden, I'm on that squadron, and that was that. And I'd not felt that since my first tour in Germany, and it was intensely passionate like that. And that's what I love the Marine Corps. Absolutely.
Did you feel intimidated when you first arrived, like, oh God, what they're going to think about this Brit or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've all the way through my flying, I've always had a little bit of this imposter syndrome that I'm not quite good enough to get this. I've got it as a fluke and stuff like that. And what that induces you to do is work really hard. Like I said, I never thought I was a natural pilot, so there was always that little thing of, oh, do you know what? Could they have got somebody better for this? You're also representing your Air Force and your country, so there's a bit of pressure on you. But like I said, I felt not a feeling of comfort on the OCU, but that's because I was out of what I was recognised and such like that. But as soon as I got to my first squadron, it was back to being on a fighter squadron, even though it's a multi-role thing, but it was that whole camaraderie thing again, and just helped me slot in straight away.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a bit of detail about that. So yeah, what were your first thoughts of the Hornet?
I mean, what would your first thoughts be? You know, I thought it was like a spaceship. I climbed in it. Bearing in mind I'd only flown the Phantom and the Hawk, and it's not the Hawk with the nice displays, it's T1 and T1A. I got in there, there's like 3 television screens and a head-up display. I'd never flown a head-up display before. And I thought, my God, this is just, it's a different world, absolutely different world. You get to get airborne, the aeroplane handles like any other aeroplane. You pull back on the stick, the houses get smaller, you push forward, they get bigger. So all of that stuff is exactly the same. However, it could turn itself inside out, which was pretty spectacular. But that impression was that nothing else looks like the Hornet. All right, there's plenty of aeroplanes that have got twin fins, but they're not angled out like that, you know. And it just looks like somebody's gone, here's the keys to the design office. Come up with something outrageous and surprise us. And I think they surprised them even more with that aeroplane. It was just spectacular.
Absolutely, yeah. So talk us through your training on the Hornet before you went to your frontline squadron, and how did it differ from the RAF?
Yeah, it was all a bit odd. I hate to talk things down. The OCU wasn't great. So ground school was all computer aided instruction.
Okay.
So you basically doing the training for yourself. And for 12 weeks of it, so this is the first 3 months I'm in the country, I can't see half of the ground school because of secret no foreign rules and such like that. So I was going into radar simulator trainers with these sim instructors who were all ex-F4 guys and Hornet guys. And they were asking these questions, what's the pulse repetition frequency of the radar at such and such? I was sitting there going, oh, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, you won't let me look at any other documents. So what happened was, after a couple of these, where it was all getting a little bit antsy, all these ex-F4 guys went, well, I tell you what, we'll teach you everything you need to know. And they took me under their wing, and they were brilliant. Flying was, I mean, slow in the extreme. One trip every couple of weeks and whatnot.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was really bad. But there were like 3 courses of students on the OCU at the time. So all the senior courses had to fly in order to get them to the front line. But it was a really slow affair. Do you know what? So much so, I have to confess various things. One afternoon, everybody had gone home early. I mean, it was a beautiful flying day, but everybody had gone home, so no aeroplanes flying. I found myself in the ops room, and they had your workup on a big board behind the ops desk with boxes, and they ticked them when you'd passed them, and there were red crosses through some of mine because I didn't need to do as much as everybody else. So I just picked up a red pen and crossed a few others out, and the next thing was I found myself passing the OCU quite quickly and ended up on the front line. I think I'd still be there if I hadn't done that. That was how it felt, you know. We're pilots and we want to get on and do stuff. So that was how the training went. And then went to the squadron. There was a bit of air combat workup, just because the F-18 was so magical in air combat. But you could catch yourself out quite easily if you thought it could do things that it couldn't actually. There wasn't very much it couldn't do, but we always try and find those bits. So I had a bit of air combat workup, and then, holy moly, I was then teaching air combat because I'd taught it previously. I then started teaching air combat very quickly on the first squadron, and just learning on the job really. There was no formal workup after that.
And can you remember your first takeoff, and could you actually feel the afterburners, when you kicked them in compared to the Phantom? Yeah,
so first takeoff in the Hornet, you did dry power.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you didn't need the afterburner. Right. Yeah, isn't that brilliant? You know, absolutely brilliant. The Phantom, you needed afterburner. You know, you needed every inch of the runway, and off it went. Yeah, first takeoff in the Hornet was dry power, which, to tell you the truth, is a bit disappointing. I kind of wanted to slam them into burner, but it still lurched off, and off we went. So I did my first burner takeoff. As every pilot tells you, it doesn't matter what aeroplane they're in. If it's got afterburner, it's a kick up the arse, and it's the best feeling in the world. And the Hornet was no different. I remember flying my first single-seat Hornet, because to start off with, you're in twin seats with instructors. My first single-seat Hornet, they call it the straight. The twin seats are called the tub.
Yeah.
And then you've got the straight. I flew the straight, and it was an F-18C Charlie model. It had the big General Electric engines in. I put the burners in, and I thought next stop Hawaii, basically. By the time I'd got the gear up and whatnot, and it took my breath away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how did the aircraft handle, and can you share some of the strengths and weaknesses of the Hornet?
Yeah. So if we go strengths, everything it did. And I don't say that as, because I flew the Hornet, it's obviously the best aeroplane in the world. Bear in mind there was no F-22 or F-35 in these days. The Hornet did things that other aeroplanes couldn't do. It was unlimited in angle of attack. The engines were carefree handling, so it didn't matter what altitude you were at, you could just slam them up to full burner, slam them back to idle, and they wouldn't complain. And it was the first, I think they called it like a soft wing aeroplane, where you put an input in all sorts of stuff will move on the aeroplane. Normally if you go left, the ailerons will move. The one on the left will go up and the one on the right will go down, if I remember my aerodynamics. In the Hornet, you want to go left, you go left, it'll decide which surface it's going to move. And that includes quite a bit of the rudder. The rudders are very important in the flying solution. So I use the phrase all the time. I could turn myself inside out with that aeroplane. I know we all do hands as pilots. If I was on one particular trip and I'd flush somebody out in front of me. Now, if I want to shoot him, normally in any other aeroplane, I'd have to overbank and pull down like that. In the Hornet, you don't do that. I was in this position once, and I just thought, well, he's down there, and I shoved the stick front right in the cockpit, and the aeroplane just went like that. And it was, I just thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I absolutely did. No other aeroplane did that at the time, so handling-wise, that was why it was different from everything else. Strengths, it was the best dogfighting aeroplane in the world. I don't care what anybody else says, it absolutely was. We could beat anybody in that aeroplane if you did the right tactics. It could carry anything. And the F-18D in particular did forward air control airborne, so we'd have a FAC in the back, bringing other aeroplanes in to attack. We could attack those targets ourselves. We could mark them with flares. We could call in naval gunfire from off the coast. It did absolutely everything. Carried harms, so it would shoot SAM sites as well. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant aeroplane. You can tell I'm a fan, can't you?
Yeah, you can, yeah. Obviously then it's been a multi-role aircraft.
Yeah.
Did it do one job better than the other, would you say?
I can't put my finger on it. To tell you the truth, I learnt quite a lot about ground attack on that aeroplane. I was very fortunate in that there was a British backseater from the Tornado GR1 on exchange with me, Gav, and he was a brilliant guy, and he taught me quite a lot about ground attack while I was learning on the job. I think it was a great ground attack aeroplane. I think it was very accurate with what it dropped, without laser. Once it carried laser-guided munitions as well, it was even more accurate. So I don't think there was anything you could fault it. It maybe couldn't carry, well, it certainly couldn't carry as much as an F-15E. It couldn't carry as much as a B-1B, of course, and a B-52, but for it was the best close air support aeroplane that the Americans had as well, as far as carrying stuff. It was much better than the Harrier. It was probably up to speed with the A-10, because that was really cooling close air support as well. Airborne, upper air type stuff, fighter pilot stuff. Why wouldn't you want to be in it? It carried AMRAAM, it carried the latest edition of AIM-9 Sidewinder. It could outturn an F-15. We could beat an F-16, although it was a hard fought fight. But yeah, I can't think of a weakness for it, apart from it was a bit light on top end speed. So if you wanted to run away from a fight, it took quite a bit to get to 1.2 running away. Other aeroplanes, F-16 would easily overhaul something like that.
Would you have to be clean if you back?
No, you could pylons. We never flew the thing completely clean, so you'd have pylons. We generally flew with a centerline tank, and it would go through the MAC quite happily there. It's just its really high top end speed wasn't that great.
So yeah, you were talking about the best dogfighter in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you manage to do a lot of DACT? I'm guessing you went up against everything in America that they had.
We did, and most of my life, I think, or the majority of the trips that I did were DACT, and we took on everybody. What was interesting was when I was on the reserve unit, we flew brown Hornets, so they were camouflaged brown. Yeah. So everybody thought we were an aggressor squadron, but we weren't. But everybody wanted to fight against us over the desert because of Iraq and Afghanistan and such like that, and we were difficult to see in that desert camp. But the bottom line is, when we got into just pure combat has a whole range of things. You know, we're normally flying 4v4s, 8v8s, 2v2s and stuff. When it gets to the proper hand-to-hand type stuff of 1v1, there was nothing that could touch that aeroplane. Hardest fight that we had was probably the F-16, because it had the F-16 weighs about 16 grams and has an engine that's as strong as powerful as a nuclear reactor. So they would try and outrate us, and they could pull 9G as well. Yeah. We were limited to 7.5. But if we were able to get the fight slow, nobody could fly as slow as a Hornet. I've flown a Hornet at 80 knots in air combat. Really? Flushed somebody out the front and just pointed the nose at them and gunned them. That was an F-16 guy. Yeah, unbelievable. Crikey. Absolutely unbelievable. Right on the edge of the stall. An F-16 would be falling out the sky at 120 or 110, somewhere around there. So we'd always, I would always take those guys slow if I could, try and flush them out the front and do it like that.